Welcome to the Gemlabs podcast. My name is Gabor Farkas and I'm your host. Today, I am talking with Marianne Schoerling about the opportunities of collective intelligence to address the great challenges of our times. We are facing one of the most challenging times in human history. There is a non-negligible risk that our past carelessness has impacted our environment in a way that endangers humanity. Technology is leaping forward in a way and at a pace that could become problematic if it remains unchecked. We need solutions to manage these and other unknown challenges. We must work together to achieve sustainable results and initiate changes that will be followed and benefit all. Collective intelligence acts as a catalyst for the kind of innovation needed. It provides the tools and methods for even more powerful collective intelligence. And now, Marianne Schoerling. Hello, Marianne. Nice to have you on this podcast. So today we're going to be talking about innovation. And maybe let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you for having me. I think it's a lovely opportunity to speak a little bit about my innovation journey. And I am Marianne. I am a sociologist by education, but also I would say by heart, because I love to understand the social patterns behind our daily lives and to understand how we actually are working together in different social systems and how we can make the best out of it. And that's the reason why I've studied sociology, and that brought me to management consulting or strategy consulting. And innovation was from the very beginning the red thread in my work. Also the topic of group dynamics and system theory. So all of these different interesting themes led to the fact that I eventually started to work in the startup scene, but also in think tanks, where I covered many different topics. But the overall thread of my conversations that I was curating and leading was to see how to foster and enable social and technological innovation to support sustainable development. In a nutshell, I have been working for the last years in a think tank called Geneva Labs and have started a few years ago. It's now 2 years, the second year now, working for the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator Foundation, GESTA. That is very similar to Geneva Labs, looking into breakthrough innovations and responsible solutions that look into how we can prepare and act upon anticipated breakthroughs and anticipated changes that will have an effect on how we collaborate together.
It would be sensible to start by hearing your definition of collective intelligence and what makes it indispensable in your work in innovation management.
I think it's an excellent question to start our conversation because it's setting the scene. Obviously, there are a lot of different possibilities to respond to what collective intelligence actually means. So what I will be giving is my personal opinion of how I define collective intelligence, taking into account that depending on your background, you might have a different definition. So it's just an offer how we can look at collective intelligence inspired by a sociologist. So at the very basic level, when I talk about collective intelligence, then I am talking about the concept of intelligence from a group. So we talk about the group level. When you look into the history of how that concept evolved, it started around the early 90s and it covered many different areas. And what you can find out very quickly is that it's very vague and inconsistent how colleagues, how different academic disciplines define collective intelligence. At the micro level, a lot of times it's being identified as a general group intelligence factor that is relevant to the performance, and it's most of the time looking into small groups. And at the macro level, it looks at bigger, larger groups that look into different types of self-organization, and that includes the indirect coordination through the environment between actions or actors. And that's something that it's called streetmergy, which is basically trying to conceptualize the idea that there is an unseen pattern of coordination, and we are trying to understand what are the factors that lead to specific behavior or interaction between actions or actors. And what excites me the most when I talk about collective intelligence is the question of how can we benefit from the diversity of within the specific group of people with different backgrounds. And so you can see that for me, for the definition of collective intelligence, the diversity aspect is an important one. And when I speak about diversity, I speak about intellectual, cognitive diversity, as well as multicultural diversity. So our conversation today is about innovation management. So when I approach innovation management, I'm fascinated by the idea how can we actually explore best practices and implement best practices to work across disciplines and across different educational and cultural backgrounds. That's actually moving our concept simply from looking into simple aggregation of people into how can we combine at first glance completely different ideas and mindsets so that we come up with solutions that really have the potential to change our life, our planet for the better.
Fantastic answer. Actually, I read in the work of ethnobiologists that all life forms that exist today are the result of collective intelligence, because originally from the very beginning, when they were only monocellular life forms, they had to use collective intelligence to develop. So it's been at the heart of life on this planet, and probably if there's life on other planets, it's the same thing that happened there as well.
Yeah.
But let's look more at the challenges that we are facing now. And obviously, collective intelligence necessitates the participation of people. Participation in collective intelligence is key for the quality of the outcome and essential in the adoption of emerging initiatives. How can we ensure participation from diverse backgrounds and socio-economic groups?
Interesting question. So again, I already explained how I define collective intelligence, and diversity plays an important role of it. So inspired by the diversity, but also inclusion and equity discourse, I would say there are a few approaches we can consider. And I just wanted to clarify here that I'm speaking here from the perspective of someone who has worked a lot within think tanks, startups, in groups that started informally and then got more and more formalized with a lot of stakeholders, which is a fantastic sandbox and later, let's say, an ecosystem to explore the challenges, but also the opportunities of working across sectors and mindsets and educational backgrounds. So I would say that we can ensure participation from diverse backgrounds and socioeconomic groups if we first learn to look behind the scenes. One sociologist that I love to read, his name is Erving Goffman, and he wrote a book where it's all about I don't know how it's called in English, but in German, if I translate the direct translation, is we all play theater. So it's about the self-presentation in daily life. And basically one of his key arguments is that depending on the context and the social system, we have many different roles to play, and the same person can be playing so many different roles that it's almost like it's a different person in depending on the context. And I like this notion because it shows that when we consider diversity and inclusion and equity in innovation management, we need to take into account that the very specific aspects that contribute to group dynamics and to the collective collaboration dynamics within a group. And having said this, it means to me that when we engage with and then we engage people based on their skills and competences, then we realize the scale of the different aspects and education, experience, mindset that the person brings to the table. But it's important that we look into the very specific context. So if I take the example that I am very familiar with, if I take a startup or a think tank that is small in size, I have different needs and different conditions for collective thinking and designing and brainstorming than if I'm in a corporate institution with very rigid structures and perhaps more limited liberty for blue sky thinking, which means that you really try to think outside the box than in that more open context. And depending on which context we are developing solutions, we need to activate different skills and competencies. So I'm not a big fan of identifying people that you want to engage by their specific degree or educational institution they have in the background, but really what they, in terms of the skills, personality, competencies they bring to the table. So I'm a big fan of this competence-based approach. And here I talk about as much about soft skills as of hard skills and technical skills. I also believe that the question never should be about the cultural fit, but the cultural mindset. I don't know if you get that point. What I'm trying to say here is that when you look for people to complement your team to start innovative thinking about a specific topic, it is not so much about if to have people who share the same ideas, but to have a common framework of shared values and see how the cultural uniqueness of the person is complementing what is already there. So you see, there are so many different layers to diversity that I think we should be activating as we are engaging and bringing people together and collaborating on a given subject. So I believe this is how most of the innovative ideas come to life. So let's take an example. Is there anything that you can give me as a starting point?
A problem about AI, there's so many of them.
Yeah, give me one example. It doesn't matter what.
Let's see, how would you make sure that the data that you produce is not used by AI against you, but for your benefit? That means the data that one is producing is used by large corporations such as Apple, such as Google, such as Amazon. And this data could be used to improve your life, help you to learn better, help you to exercise more. It identifies a number of parameters about the way you function. But this data is being used in order to help them make a profit by selling you things that you don't necessarily need.
Okay, that's a great example. So you would not necessarily think at the first moment about including a person with a degree in fashion or a person with expertise in what can I give you example, a diplomat. But the beauty of experimenting, of including people with a complete different background, but who share the same values and actually are trained in completely different system will help you to identify that you not haven't even thought about in your wildest dream. So as a person who has worked with many different startups, I saw the potential when you allow for that experimenting, of really be bold in testing how you can complement your team and how you can benefit from having the different perspective on the given subject that is not necessarily the expertise of the people who are joining the discussion. So I think diverse thinking we can foster through continuous learning opportunities. And one learning opportunity I see through activities such as hackathons, or through joining events that cover subjects out of your comfort zone. Say, I'm a good example. I'm a sociologist, but right now I am exploring the world of quantum technology or quantum computing, which is definitely not my expertise, but I'm learning so much by engaging in that conversation, because it's the people I'm engaging with have a complete different background, yet we share some values and identified a common objective, which is to think about how can we provide access to technology, how can we address the digital divide between certain regions, and how can we make sure that the beneficiaries of the technologies are not a few, but many, and advance best practices in educational material and capacity building. And that's a beautiful experience, because I can see that the orchestration and the bold inclusion of people with backgrounds that are non-tech in a tech context and the other way around is contributing to the fact that questions are being raised that would never have been thought about in a more homogeneous conversation that we see happening when we stay within our comfort zone and within our circle, where we engage with colleagues who have the same background and the same interest. So I love the way how we can actually challenge the space that is still unknown for us and get a glimpse into the possibilities of development.
In order to benefit from that, obviously, what is very important is to have as many people as possible coming from different walks of life to contribute, right?
I don't know. I actually, there are different studies when it comes to diversity. And from my understanding, it's not necessarily that you would like to have the highest diversity possible, but it's really about what kind of pattern of diversity you are looking at. It's more about which specific skills, mindset, cultural add are you bringing into the group, and how is I call it the social pattern of the group, rather than having just like a diverse group, like having a representative of each region. For me, is not necessarily a diverse group, because if you have then from each region, let's say you have somebody from Nigeria, and you have somebody from Geneva, and you have somebody from Poland in the group, as they represent different geographies. You could have group thinking as well, because the backgrounds they're bringing that might not be so different. So if I belong to a specific socioeconomic group in those countries and have traveled quite a bit, and this is something that is in common of the group members, you might not benefit from the diversity that you were hoping for.
Then the challenge is to strike the right balance of profiles.
Yes, I think so.
What techniques should be used to incentivize participation?
First of all, it always comes back to clear communication of the benefits of the participation. So I think part of it is like having mechanisms in place that ensure there's equal participation, and measures. You might want to consider having a specific quota, and you might want to already think about which are the communities that you want to have represented in your group or in your conversation. Is it just think about sectors? Is it an industry-led conversation? Do you want to also have like non-governmental approaches being represented? Do you want to have a regional representation? And at the end of the day, we're talking here about humans, right? And we as humans, we always naturally look for the familiar. So we would look, would I identify with a specific group, where are some commons and where are some differences? Are there common challenges other face as well, and other common benefits? And I think when we want to incentivize participation for people with diverse backgrounds, we need to understand what is hindering access, what are some preconceptions that potential participants might have. The topic of privilege is something extremely important, I believe, in particular when you think about different localities. The topic of privilege means that you think about, when you look at your group that you're trying to compile, are there specific members within the group that are there because of certain privileges? And what are those privileges? A privilege is that you actually can afford to participate in specific events. Are these events hybrid, or are they only in person? And if it's in person, what is the cost to actually get there? See, this is like very hands-on. It's really looking into what are the factors contributing to the fact that some can participate and some cannot participate. And I think those who are not benefiting from certain privileges, they understand that they are being disadvantaged. And those who have the privilege, a lot of times do not notice or recognize and are not aware that they have this privilege. So I think that an important technique to incentivize participation is to be aware of those mechanisms behind the scenes and to address them with specific measures that would allow participation of underrepresented groups in the given group.
There's an obvious follow-up to what you have been saying. And
yeah,
I would like to hear you talk about gender equality or gender balance in that respect. Is there something that needs to be said?
Of course, I'm a woman, and I do see that it happens every now and then that you have a panel. I have even not came across this term a year ago. So a panel is basically a panel where you only have male participants, right? And it happens quite a bit in the tech world. And while you have enough female leaders that could be part of the conversation. So I think that in terms of gender equality or let's say reflected composition of gender representation in groups, be it a panel at a conference or be it for specific positions for a project, I think we cannot afford to not look into, did we really make an effort that the female perspective is part of the conversation?
Yes, I suppose after having invited people to participate and making sure that we have the right balance, there's another challenge, which it would be to maintain long-term engagement. And I would imagine that maintaining that the contribution of a woman who might be in minority is part of that challenge also. The long-term engagement and commitment from participants can be difficult if there is no adequate financial compensation. How can we ensure the sustainability of collective intelligence projects to address complex challenges that require ongoing effort?
Okay, just to break down the question, because I think it's a very long question, and maybe I just
yes,
want to
lots of elements. Sorry.
Yes. So how can we ensure that collective intelligence projects are sustainable? Right? So that's part of the question.
We start this process of collective intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
and we get people to come together. We've done that. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. We've done that with the projects that you were running 2 years ago. And so we have people participating in the exciting phase, which is the hackathon or the design thinking project, where the projects emerge. And then the focus groups start working. How do we ensure the commitment of the people who were onboarded to continue working? Because in order for the project to come to fruition, you need ongoing effort, dedicated people who will donate their time. And those are sometimes very important projects. So how do we ensure that there is this ongoing effort going on, even if there is no money?
Yeah, so actually, I think that's a very important topic to address. I think we need to discuss or set the scene what kind of innovation we are talking about. I do see a difference between social innovation and technological innovation, because it's different business use cases behind.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, different opportunities. Maybe it's a good moment to actually explain what I've been running a few years ago, so that we can have the right context. So at the Geneva Macro Labs, I've co-started an initiative called Geneva Impact. And basically with that group, we tested a new approach to innovation for sustainability. And then we had support of a development fund, which kind of acted as an innovation partner. And together with different experts, and experts is basically, these were representatives from all sectors, from industry, from academia, young and older research and developers, from representatives from international development organizations, such as from UN entities. And we all brought them together to work on, to develop specific projects, concepts that contribute to specific SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. And so we basically covered the entire innovation cycle from theme sourcing. So we said, let's take as a starting point nature-based solutions, and then see what kind of specific cases, projects, ideas would come out. And basically the overall idea was to then build market fit ideas with those teams, so that they can be implemented with the support of investors. And so what made Geneva Impact unique was that we started the discussion of bringing in those who provide the funds at the very early stage, so that they can co-shape how the ideas are evolving. And so basically the Geneva Impacts process followed, in that sense, a new investment, but also venture builder approach that is coined sometimes as impact trading and investment. And I'm sharing that because I think that kind of shows the ambition of many think tanks or startups that are working in the field of social innovation. So it's a social innovation to have such a mechanism in place. At the same time, the impact projects, in order that they remain sustainable, need a business case behind. And this is where funds are being attracted. My response to the question, how can we ensure sustainability of such projects, is that I think that we need to ensure that multi-stakeholder partnerships across sectors are being established. For social innovation projects, a lot of times it's more philanthropic support that is avenue that attracts partners, whereas for the projects themselves developed within such a mechanism, it is venture capital, VC capital, that will help to bring those ideas into the market. I would say that philanthropic engagement is needed to support the core team, and then partnerships with industry is needed to allow for those projects that are being developed together to be actually implemented. In terms of the methods behind, I think target communication is important from day one. And also I became a big fan of storytelling, because that makes complex ideas a lot of times much more understandable and approachable. When you have collective intelligence projects, a lot of times they develop pretty fast a very specific and unique melange of terminology that's being used. And at the end, you do a lot of translating. So you try to translate between the different participants, between onboarding partners and the established groups, etc. And I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to storytelling. And this is why I'm a big advocate for the communication approach behind collective intelligence projects, because I believe that it has a great impact on the success and the sustainability of such endeavors.
Interesting how you can achieve miracles when you have a good story to begin with.
Yes.
It makes everybody dream. There are always hurdles in the process of getting where we want to get. Online platforms can create echo chambers, but also herd-like behavior where like-minded individuals reinforce each other's views and ostracize divergent ones. How can we foster constructive dialogue and exposure to diverse perspectives within collective intelligence initiatives?
Okay. I think it's not only something that we can take into account for collective intelligence initiatives, but in general for collaborating across different sectors and backgrounds. I think that that's it's a question that can be looked at from different angles. And I would like to again use Geneva Macrolabs with its initiative Geneva Impacts as an example. We were hosting these different collective intelligence initiatives and created this dialogue to develop impact projects. And I found that it was extremely important to create that level of trust between the participants so that constructive dialogue could actually evolve. In our case, participants of our teams that worked on projects didn't know each other, and they met all online. So it was like blind date for everyone. And it was very helpful to have a few sessions where trust was being developed. And I think that's an important starting point when you look into techniques such as sandbox approach, where you play around with different approaches to a given problem, and you just start experimenting and trying to see what is actual the project or the use case that you're trying to develop. You need that level of trust and also willingness to listen to each other. And for some it's easier, for some it's a bit more difficult. And I think it is extremely useful to have, particularly for collective intelligence initiatives, to have facilitators that kind of help creating that dialogue, that can also play the role of a broker between diverse perspectives. So that means in order to make the best out of blue sky thinking, of developing minimal viable products, of defining the roadmap for a joint initiative, we need to include reflection and feedback loops, and as well moments where the human factor comes in and you do something fun in between, so that you create that level of trust between the parties. And I also believe that celebrating little wins as a team, as a group, is important.
I think it's fair to say that this is how I first came across Geneva Macrolabs, Gemlabs, and I participated in the first design thinking workshop and was involved with one of the focus groups that emerged. And I really liked this initiative very much. So yeah, I thought it was important to mention.
Thank you, Gabor. Indeed, I remember that you were one of those participants who was at ease to build the team, the group at an early stage. And I think that depending on the type of innovation that you are creating, you need different types of roles represented in the group. I think it's always important to have some sort of facilitator that is neutral. I also believe it's important that there is one person who is more the diplomat, reading the room, understanding what not has been said, but has a huge influence on how things evolve within the group for the projects. And also having the geek or the geeks that provide the cognitive intelligence to actually advance on the given matter. And That's something not so easy because we're all humans and we all have our agendas. So constructive dialogue includes that the protocol of communication is clear to everyone and that there is a clear feedback loop. And let's say also even escalation is a bit too much of a word, but really to try to address in a diplomatic manner the tensions that can arise depending on the conversation.
You have mentioned the importance of the facilitator to be included in the process. Are there other things that you think are important that should be also included?
Yes, if I can do a little bit of a marketing here, we actually published a paper after our experience that's called Co-Creating Innovation for Sustainability. And there we describe a few elements: design thinking, agile development, system thinking. And I think apart from those factors, I think it's important when organizing such a process or these processes that we need type of an organization that is willing to accept failure and to see what are the key learnings when things are not going the way that how they were envisioned at the first place. This means that an organization for such type of innovation needs to be agile and even startup or scale up style, which means that you need agility in the process so that you can adapt to the needs that will arise that you might not have foreseen, that you can respond to the new opportunities arising, like new partners coming to approach your group, and that kind of process management definitely is also a change management exercise. So I think it's important when we are organizing, and here this applies to any multi-stakeholder project. When you're organizing a project that involves many stakeholders and needs to orchestrate different interests, it's important that the main procedures are clear, but that there's also certain flexibility to reach the objectives. And that means that there needs to be the possibility that certain objectives that have been set at first can be actually challenged and modified, while the values that have been established are being shared by everyone and there is a clear selection of non-negotiables for the participants of the group.
There are so many things that we could look at that are connected to this process. We could look at the notion of time, the processes, innovation processes sometimes take years, sometimes they can be achieved in months. And connecting this to the notion of maintaining the engagement when there's uncertainty and there's not a lot of money connected to it is also something very interesting. Would you like to say something about that?
I think I understand where you're going to. So yes, so I think when it comes to the time span of innovation projects, of course, it really depends on the idea that's being followed. But what we experience at Geneva Impact is that we had projects evolving that were super promising, but just out of scope for the given resources that were at hand at that time. And I think it's important to have a key group, a core group of philanthropic partners that are willing to invest into innovation teams that will not bring results within a year, but are willing to allow the exploration to happen. I think it really requires a group of philanthropic partners for that type of innovation that we were looking at, which was technological innovation paired with social innovation.
Yeah, that is really interesting to hear you say that, because you're the third person that I'm having a conversation with in the series of podcasts that I hope Gemlabs will be having for a long time. And you all said the same thing. So I spoke with the president of Gemlabs, and I spoke with Jörn, who was your colleague in setting up the project you were talking about. And you all say the same thing, how important it is to have multiple sources of funding, because you have to maintain something, and there's a cross-pollination, and at the end, when something emerges, everybody benefits.
Absolutely. Social innovation is as important as technological innovation. It goes hand in hand. It means that when we are developing a new AI application for the benefit of all, or if we are developing a solution based on blockchain that allows to address slavery or whatever topic you choose, then you, of course, can have a technological solution. But at the end of the day, technology, in my perspective, is never the response. It can be part of the solution, but sometimes it's not. And I think that the notion of social innovation means that you think about the sociological implications of having a specific tech innovation at hand. And this is where actually my new work that I do with GESTA, the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator, kicks in, because it looks into, let's start anticipating breakthrough innovation and how we can act upon that anticipation with the approach of, they call it anticipatory science diplomacy, which means that you bring scientists and diplomats, in a nutshell, together to collaborate and identify together potential solutions. And this is what I'm doing right now. And I think that's wonderful. The notion of anticipation is something completely new to me, that is different to forecast or scenario building, but really looks into acting upon the potential change that we might see. And technology is evolving rapidly. It's just incredible how fast everything is now evolving. I did a podcast like 2-3 years ago, tech innovation and workforce development. And in fact, I remember at that time, my interviewee said that if you are not continuously learning, after 3 months, you're completely out. And I think this might not be the same rapidness for a sociologist like me in the tech world, but it's extremely fast evolving. And I believe that in that discourse, it is important that social scientists, political scientists, international development specialists, etc., they are part of the discussion, particularly when we talk about sustainable development. And I think it's right now a perfect time where we can build and establish best practices of how to include those voices as well. That actually addresses the question of what type of organization is needed. We need an organization of innovation processes where we actually have that representation ensured. So having technologists working with diplomats, with social scientists, with philosophers to anticipate, but at the same time address the challenges and opportunities that will arise when we are at the point of a breakthrough. Just think about ChatGPT.
Before ChatGPT, the fastest adoption of a technology was internet.
Yeah, exactly.
But ChatGPT was adopted, it went from no users to millions and millions of users within a period of months. And that was just incredible. And when we look at how social changes came about, they are always preceded by the arrival of a new technology. So electricity, and then radio, telephone, TV, and internet has been had an incredible impact on the society. And the sociologists like you have noted how much it has changed and how differently we interact because of the internet. But before we move on from the financial consideration of innovation processes, I'll just have one more question in relation to that, because when you talk about innovation and people in collective intelligence involved in working together, There are entities who stand to benefit financially, while others, although meaningful contributors, stand to gain nothing. How do we balance this?
Can you please specify what you mean with they gain nothing?
You have companies who will generate huge amounts of money by exploiting whatever came out of the innovation process, and the others are just contributing to that wealth, but they do not gain wealth. If anything, a little bit of their freedom might be going away with the new thing they have contributed to.
I think it's quite a difficult question. Yeah, can you rephrase it differently?
Okay. Although their contribution is not as clear. But let's look at Uber. Okay. So Uber started out by working on a intelligent system that would allow for cars and taxis and this kind of vehicles to be driven without chauffeurs, right? And in order to generate the money they need for this research, they disrupted the entire transportation market with their system. This had an impact on the people who viewed initially the Uber system as a way of getting money. But since their revenue was lower than the one who were driving taxis, they became attached to the system and quite dependent on the small revenue that it was awarding them. So on one side of the spectrum, you have a company that's making a lot of money and working on developing a system that will replace all the people who are contributing to it. So how could this be balanced in order for this not to be unfair? Or maybe it's unfair from my perspective.
Yeah, a lot of times sort of to say we are not here to judge, but to analyze and expose the social pattern behind. But what you are pointing to is something important where the entire question of governance comes into play. I believe that in order to avoid having such side effects of technological innovation, we need to think about what kind of social innovation do we need in order to address those potential threats we could at the end see with Uber. It's a very good example because it was not anticipated, and perhaps there was no mission undertaken to address that at an early stage. That's why I believe it's important that when you are developing tech solutions, that you have a team, people looking at the social implications of it, and at the same time think about ethics, think about how does that affect specific groups of population. Also thinking about what kind of governance mechanisms will need to be there so that there are early measures in place to counter that effects that we see with the example of Uber. And that's actually not an easy exercise because you need to involve many different groups. But I believe having fora, and this is actually something that Geneva Macrolabs Gemlabs is doing. We, for instance, have after-work events and roundtables where we discuss specific solutions. Currently, it's AI that we're looking at, and see what are governance implications, and then actually engage with representatives of international organizations, but also with industry, etc., to raise awareness of the potential. That is collective intelligence at its best, when you manage to have those different voices reflected at the different phases of innovation design. And it also includes that we break down boundaries between certain professions that have not worked together before. And we are based in Geneva, where we have the financial sector being represented at one side of the lake, and then we have international Geneva, where we have UN organizations. It's the perfect example. This is one reason why Geneva Macrolabs was born, because we felt like we need to break down boundaries, build bridges between different stakeholders to understand the complexity of introducing tech innovation or dealing with managing the evolvement of technology that has the potential to change everything that we know today.
Let's turn our focus a little bit on something that is equally important, which is data. So collective intelligence relies heavily on data. How can we ensure the quality and neutrality of this data to avoid perpetuating biases that hinder progress?
One of the first saying that I learned when I went into blockchain was rubbish in, rubbish out. So I think it's a pretty easy formula to summarize my response, which is if you want to benefit from the use of data, we need to understand and manage and impact the way data is collected and identify at a very early stage potential sources for bias. And I believe, again, this brings us back to why we came together. Collective intelligence per se is a way to unfold hidden biases. And when we talk about bias, it's heavily connected, in my perspective, to the notion of we all benefit from different privileges. And a lot of times we do not see certain biases because they are not relevant for ourselves. But I am a mixed race person, and I'm aware of certain privileges that I have and certain privileges I don't have because of my unique life story, let's say. And that helps me, generally speaking, to see patterns of how we aggregate data on specific topics and see actually the way we collected data only included specific regions, or it only deployed a specific theory of change that is built on the perspective of a certain stakeholder. So there are so many factors contributing to the establishment of biases and to the, we say in sociology, outbreaks. It's like the recreation of biases that we need the intelligence and the inclusion of social sciences, ethnologues, and alike to unfold that often hidden and not so obvious process behind the scenes.
You suggested the role that sociologists and ethicists could play.
Yeah.
Are they the one who should ensure the transparency and ethical use of the information that is in the data that we're using?
I would say the role that they play is to look at the many examples that are out there to showcase their establishment, so that we have examples that people can understand, wow, actually, yes, this is how that narrative came together. And in fact, this is based on the fact that only, just make it up now, men between 30 and 50 years from that region contributed to that innovation or to that solution or to that discourse. So I think we have to be really mindful of the sociology behind our conversations and how we address tech innovation and as well our objectives. So it's again the same principles that we discussed for collective intelligence to work applies to that very mechanism to avoid inequality and encourage neutrality of data.
So this leads me to a question that seems to be obvious to me. The answer might not be so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Can collective intelligence platforms be truly accessible to everyone? What is the risk that they will exacerbate existing digital divides?
So it really depends what is the context of the different collective intelligence platforms and what do you actually consider as a collective intelligence platform. If you do consider think tanks as an example for collective intelligence platforms, I would say in theory, they can be accessible to everyone, because it's not something that can only be established at a certain geography. I think we have many examples of such groups around the world. The digital divide as a topic comes in when we look into the topic of access to knowledge, access to the technology, access to computers, access to internet. That makes it then harder to scale specific solutions. This is why I believe that we can address digital divide by giving underrepresented geographies in specific conversations a seat, and looking into, actually, I am discussing the development of AI solutions in Ghana, and yet in that context, I am organizing a conference in the States. How can we make sure that we have the opportunity for equal participation in events, conversations, meetings where solutions are being developed? Sometimes it's something simple, making sure there are opportunities for internships, or developing an exchange program, or developing joint initiatives that will allow to explore step by step how realities differ, to develop, to design the next big innovation. So it's really a question of how do we address access to resources, and how much we are willing to invest in learning how this works. Because, of course, it depends on the orchestration of different individuals that bring their own agenda, background, history, mindset into a group setting.
We're just touching the surface here, because when you mention underrepresented geographical groups, if you invite people from Ghana, the country you mentioned, you might have a representation of a geographical location. But within that geographical location, you also have a variety of different social, economical, even social cultural differences and different groups. And that is even more complicated to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah. This is what I meant before, that we need to look a bit deeper into diversity and not just the geography as the factor, because it can be misleading, right? We have different groups represented in all different regions, and I think true diversity also looks into these additional layers of who's actually participating in which conversation.
Yes, it's interesting, because then we might discover connections between some social, economical, social cultural group underrepresented in Ghana that is very similar to a social cultural group of France that is also underrepresented. And they have the same necessities that are completely ignored or overlooked. So how do we mitigate the risk of seeing collective intelligence be misused for malicious or selfish purposes?
Wow. So I'm not sure if I have the answer to that question, but at the end of the day, that's for me a governance question. It's a question of diplomacy. It's a question of standards, of regulation.
Of experts, the role of experts?
Yes, the role of experts. At the end of the day, selfish purpose for collective intelligence might not be at the end harmful. The question is, at the end of the day, to me, what is the actual purpose to participate or to use collective intelligence? And that comes back to the set of values and principles that I believe need to be set at the very early stage when you gather your group that is meant to collaborate together towards a specific innovation. So I think misusage and addressing hidden agendas will always play a factor. However, I believe that in being mindful who is participating and establishing a common agreement of the set of principles and values is extremely important. And also, I would also say that the mission needs to be clear to every participant. Clear and accepted.
Clear and accepted. What should the role of experts be when collective intelligence thrives on diverse perspectives?
Here we would need to define what kind of experts are we talking about, but I would, and I see different expertise being represented. You have the, let's say, the governance experts included. You have the social scientists being involved. Depending on what type of innovation you are looking for and trying to encourage, you would need to orchestrate the composition of your experts accordingly. And it's not so much about the official role that they play, but the unofficial leadership they are taking. So an expert can be official, the leader of a team that works on a project, but then turns out that it's not the tech expert that took that leadership, but actually the young student who really identifies with the call and is evolving into the leader that the innovation at hand needs. So it's a question of the objective and also of the context of such mission.
That's a tricky one because we might be in a situation where experts' guidance becomes a hurdle or becomes hurdles because of experts' short-sightedness. How do we prevent that?
Short answer, based on what I just said before, I think we can avoid through having leaders. Right? If you have a leader who has the vision and the greater picture, then a good leader would actually address the involvement of the experts and would orchestrate the matchmaking between the different participants, but also address the needs where additional expertise is needed.
That is a perfectly understandable way of looking at it. How do we effectively prioritize solutions and make decisions within collective intelligence initiatives?
One of my key takeaways is to clarify roles and expectations, not only at the beginning, but in between as well. Revisiting with the leaders that become more and more outspoken, more and more present, more and more visible within an initiative, giving them the space to lead and help the team to evolve and to also accept that failures are part of the game, and that's actually a beautiful opportunity and not something to be avoided. Also, Geneva Macro Labs has taught me that depending on the objective that you set for your discussions, you will get quite different results. So be mindful how bold or how small your objectives are, but be consistent. We made good experience in being as specific as possible, but also allow for openness. So it's really that the thin line between the balance between structuring, but not directing too much. Find different ways to encourage momentum outside the official meetings. Other ways to massage a bit the egos, perhaps, in between. Other ways to spotlight some achievements that not all members of the group might have seen. Because people, we are human beings, we thrive when we are giving praise for what we're doing. And I think being visible with our contributions has a powerful impact on how we then are able to grow. And then I also believe that in terms of a management point of view, it's important that the communication stays targeted and doesn't come overwhelming. So it requires a lot of prep work and also a lot of follow-up, but it's worth because it helps to make participants feel comfortable and leaving their comfort zone, which actually is something that you want. You want them to think out of the box. So the question is, how can you actually build an environment where they are willing and capable to think out of the box?
Well, I have to say that you do that quite well. That we have to look at maybe one more thing before concluding, because I think it's a really important one. Defining and measuring the success of collective intelligence initiatives can be challenging, right?
Yes.
What would be effective ways to assess the true impact of these projects on complex issues?
Well, to assess the true impact of such projects, I think a lot of work needs to go at the beginning into the theory of change that you are trying to explore, implement. And the theory of change will help to set the objectives, but also the measures of your impact. And that can not only be in quantitative terms, I believe, but also needs qualitative measures that count equally. I can produce the most fancy solution for the new generation of mosquito nets and have the measure I have produced 1 million of those mosquito nets and am collaborating with 3 regions and have distributed that amount of nets. But if I don't think about the implementation and the uptake of my solution by the benefiting group, then I'm missing completely the final objective, which in that case is protection. So technological solutions need to be, their implementation needs to be embedded in a greater theory of change and in a clear plan how you envision to engage the benefiting groups and how you address also the side effects, the negative side effects of your innovation. And that's not an easy task. And this is where I think collective intelligence processes can benefit a lot when bringing in then, for instance, a human rights expert, which in our case was happening. For one of our tech solutions, we had human rights experts at the table who were raising the trade-offs of certain aspects of the solution, which made me think, wow, I haven't thought about that aspect. I haven't thought about what this would mean for, let's say, gender equality, or what this would mean for the health of waters. So it's so easy to get lost in the main objective and ignoring, let's say, the potential positive side effects because of being too narrow-minded. That can happen quite fast. And this is why we benefit from then bringing in people with completely diverse backgrounds so that those spots actually become visible.
Thank you, Marianne. We've covered a vast topic that could talk about this for hours. Is there something that you think that we should add that I missed?
So actually, something that I haven't shared is that I started playing the violin at a very early age when I was 3. And I gave my first concert when I was 7. And actually, I remember that moment when I first played in an orchestra, that moment of awe, of wow, I'm part of this. Everybody's contributing. There's a director, a conductor who is trying to keep everything together. But at the end of the day, every musician counts. And this feeling of awe was even greater when I was playing the solo. And why I'm sharing this story is that I think it's a good analogy of the dynamics of collective intelligence processes, because when you have musicians playing together and let's say they're improvising, they need to bring the experience, their intuition, their expertise to something that is created collectively, because it could not exist without the collectiveness. And everyone needs to listen and needs to give little nonverbal signals to the rest. So it's like the entire body that is contributing. By the way, I think I gave this example in the paper that we published. And I really like it because it shows that in order to create something beautiful, there are different contributions. There is your personality, there is your expertise, there is your human body that you bring, the body language. And we benefit from being aware of that multitude of offerings that we bring to the table to collaboratively work on something with a greater purpose. And obviously in that example of playing together in an orchestra or in that musical context, you have the goal to create that magic moment where everything is in harmony and you've created that beauty together. And I think the same comes to innovation. Innovation needs to get to the moment where you can see the beauty of it and where you can feel, even from that's a very philosophical way to look at it, feel and see where are the spots where we need to fine tune. Mm-hmm. If you haven't tuned your instrument, it will not be so pleasant experience, neither for you nor for the others. and with playing the violin, for those who share that experience, if you're not in a good mood, or if there's something not right, you immediately hear it in your instrument because your body is like transporting your state directly to the instrument. And I think it's the same, like working in groups and working collectively on a common goal. Like there are hidden, invisible dynamics happening at first glance, but if we take a deeper look and immerse all of ourselves into the process, we can actually spot quite a bit. And it's that what excites me to see. Actually, I have this room filled with computer scientists and a philosopher and perhaps a human rights specialist. And what are their concerns and objectives, and what can they bring to the bigger picture so that we can actually build something beautiful together? I wanted to conclude our conversation with that picture and that feeling of awe, what we are capable to achieve together if we're willing to buy in and to contribute what it takes to achieve the common goal. And that's why I mentioned Gemlabs.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Marianne. That was a very interesting conversation. We'll continue working on these innovation processes together, and Gemlabs will be bringing new innovations soon.
Thank you, Gabor. Truly enjoyed it as well, and looking forward to our next collaboration.
Thank you. Bye.